I always thought the forest would save me from the world. Turns out it's the one place that's been waiting to swallow me whole since the day I put on this damn uniform. My name's Nate. I've been a park ranger for the Pine Hollow National Preserve for a little over 6 years. It's about 60 miles outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Thick pines, steep ridges, and so many miles of back trails that sometimes even we lose track of what's out there. People get lost more than you'd think. Some come back on their own. Some come back in bags. Some don't come back at all. I've got a stack of missing person reports in my cabin desk, half-faded copies of real people who were here one day and gone the next. When I took this job, they gave me the same list of rules they've handed every rookie since the 70s. Most of it's standard. Don't feed the bears. Don't sleep on shift. Don't talk to the press. But at the bottom, in pencil that's been erased and rewritten so many times the paper's gone soft, there's rule number 7. Never look between the trees. Nobody talks about it. Nobody jokes about it around the campfire. The senior rangers don't answer questions. They just tighten their boots and change the subject. The older guys tell you the forest has eyes, but they never say what's staring back. Last Thursday, I broke rule number 7. I was 3 miles past trail marker 19, an old switchback that nobody uses anymore because it dead ends at a slope that washed out after the big flood in '96. But someone had called in a hiker screaming they'd seen a shape by the old ranger station ruins. Dispatch didn't believe it. That station's been nothing but rotting timber and raccoons for decades. I hiked out alone, radio crackling in and out, boots sliding on wet leaves that smelled like rain and old pine sap. I found the station, or what's left of it, around 1:30 a.m. The moon barely touched the clearing. The station's roof had collapsed in the middle, moldy and moss swallowing the old bunk beds and desk inside. I should have checked the perimeter, called it clear, and turned around. But then I saw something flicker through the tree line, a shimmer between 2 trunks. Too dark to see clearly, too quiet to be the wind. I stepped closer, stupid as hell, squinting at that black space between the trunks, like it would make sense if I stared long enough. It didn't. It moved. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the shadows, branches swaying, maybe a trick of the wind through the pines. But then I realized the night was dead calm. No breeze, not even the usual rustle of leaves overhead, just that shape shifting where no shape should be. I held my breath, tried to steady the beam of my flashlight on the spot between the 2 massive trunks. The bark looked wet where the light hit it, slick with dew that hadn't formed anywhere else. The gap between them seemed wider now, darker somehow, like the forest behind them didn't exist at all. Just blackness so thick my mind refused to name it. A crack echoed from deeper in the trees, sharp like a branch snapping under something heavy. I swung the beam left, then right. Nothing, just more trunks, more underbrush that looked the same in every direction. But when I turned back to that space between the trees, the shape was closer. I know it sounds impossible. I know how it sounds, even as I write this. But I swear on my badge it was closer by at least 5 feet. I stepped back, boot slipping on wet needles, my breath steaming the cold air that suddenly tasted like copper. My radio hissed at my belt, picking up static that pulsed in time with the pounding in my ears. I should have called in. Should have said, possible contact. Should have said, I need backup. But my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. The shape tilted, folding in on itself like fabric in water. For a second, I swear I saw the glint of something that looked like eyes buried in that darkness, but not eyes like any animal I'd seen. No shine, no clear shape, just 2 smudges that swallowed my flashlight's beam like it was nothing. I heard a whisper then, not loud, not outside me, but inside my skull. a voice that didn't use words so much as it unspooled a thought behind my eyes. Closer. I don't know if it was my own brain repeating it, or if it was buried in that space between those trunks. But it was enough to freeze my boots to the mud. Something cracked behind me, louder this time. I spun around, flashlight sweeping over rotten timbers, the sagging outline of the old station's doorframe. Nothing. When I turned back, the gap between the trees was empty. Just forest behind it, pines that looked the same as every other patch of woods in this cursed park. My chest felt tight, lungs barely pulling in the cold air as I stumbled back up the trail. The radio on my belt crackled once more, a burst of static that almost sounded like my name before it cut to dead silence. I didn't run. Not yet. But I kept my eyes locked on the ground, boots finding the trail by memory alone. One step, another. I didn't look back at the trees, not once, because somewhere deep down I knew if I did, I'd see it waiting for me between the trunks, closer than before. I didn't sleep when I got back to the ranger station. I sat at my desk until dawn, boots still wet with mud, uniform sleeves reeking of peine, and the cold sweat that wouldn't dry off my neck. The radio stayed silent on the shelf beside the coffee machine. No calls, no chatter from the other rangers pulling the overnight watch on the main gate. I tried to write up my report like nothing happened. Unfounded sighting, no contact. Old station still clear, but my pen shook so bad I left smears of ink across the page. My hand wouldn't stop tracing rule number 7 at the bottom of the copy taped to the corkboard by the door. Never look between the trees. We'd all read it 100 times, but I'd never felt it scratch inside my head like that night. I told myself maybe it was just a trick of the dark. Sleep deprivation. I'd pulled 3 doubles that week, so my eyes weren't exactly clear. But every time I closed them, I saw that gap between the trunks, the way it moved like something breathing with the forest. I thought about calling my old supervisor, Dan. He retired 5 years ago, bought a trailer out by Black Elk Creek, where the pines thin out and the fog rolls off the hills like smoke. He's the one who told me, back when I was a rookie, you see something between the trees, you keep walking. You hear something between the trees, you keep walking. You feel something, you run. I always laughed when he said it. Thought it was just old-timer crap to haze the newbies. I wish I'd paid better attention. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor outside the back door clicked on. I heard gravel crunch under boots, but when I peered through the dusty window, the lot was empty. The light stayed on for nearly an hour, buzzing like a trapped wasp. I sat there staring at the trees lining the edge of the lot, wondering if that space between the pines was darker than the rest. By the time the sun dragged itself over the ridge, the sensor finally flicked off. I pulled my hood up, grabbed my thermos, and stepped outside to check for tracks. The gravel was clean. No footprints, no animal scat, no sign anything had been there at all. But the tree line, the way the branches leaned in toward each other, needled tips nearly touching like a curtain pulled half shut. It made my throat dry out. I radioed dispatch for a day shift handover and told myself I'd sleep when I got home. But when I climbed into my truck and turned the engine over, my eyes flicked to the side mirror, just once, and I swear I saw a black strip between the trees that didn't belong. A gap that bent when I blinked like it knew I was watching. I didn't go straight home, couldn't. Instead, I drove 20 miles out to a diner off Route 74, the one that smells like burnt coffee and old vinyl, where the lights hum and nobody asks questions if you look like hell. I sat in a back booth under the mounted deer head, trying to breathe through the taste of cold hash browns and watered-down coffee that did nothing to settle my hands. My phone buzzed on the table, screen cracked from where I'd dropped it last winter on an icy trail. One missed call from Dan. I hadn't even dialed him yet. I swear I hadn't. But there it was, Dan Sawyer, 2:47 a.m. No voicemail, just that single line like a message I wasn't supposed to get. I stepped outside to call him back, boots crunching on the thin layer of frost that clung to the lot, even though the sun was high by then. The line rang twice before he picked up, his voice dry, thin, like he'd been awake all night listening for my call. "You looked, didn't you?" That's all he asked. Not "how are you?" Not what happened. Just that. I didn't answer at first. The wind at my back smelled like old pine needles and diesel from the trucks lined up behind the diner. I told him everything anyway. The old station, the shape, the whisper. The silence that came after stretched so long, I thought the line had died. Finally, he cleared his throat. I heard the squeak of his trailer door, the soft thud of boots on wooden steps. You ever wonder why they never cut those trees down, Nate? Why we let the old trails rot out there while the new ones snake around the ridges? His words came slow, careful, like he was afraid to spill too much at once. He told me about the first time he broke rule number 7, back in '83 when he was a greenhorn like me, sent out to track a missing hiker near Hollow Creek. Said he saw a space between two massive white pines that shouldn't have been there. Said he heard it too, the whisper, the promise. Said he turned his back but never really left it behind. "You don't get rid of it," he rasped. "You just pray it forgets your name long enough for your kids to grow up and your bones to dry out somewhere it can't find." He paused then, breath catching in a static crackle that made the hair on my arms stand up. "But it remembers you, Nate. Sooner or later, it always does." Before I could ask him what that meant, before I could even say I'm sorry, the line went dead. The dial tone cut through the wind like a warning, flat and cold against my ear. I stared out at the edge of the lot where a few pines huddled together behind the dumpster. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw something slip between their trunks, thin and shifting like a shadow learning how to stand. I drove back to my cabin with the radio off, one hand tapping the steering wheel in time with my heartbeat. The road that cuts through Pine Hollow winds so tight you could swear it doubles back on itself just to keep you lost. Every curve looked the same. Pines pressing in, their needles sighing against the truck, as if they knew exactly who sat inside. By the time I pulled into the dirt lot beside my cabin, the sun was already slipping behind the ridge, throwing long shadows that tangled like black ropes between the trees. My porch light flickered when I stepped up, buzzing once before holding steady. I stood there a minute, watching the tree line sway even though the air felt dead still. Inside, the place smelled like old coffee grounds and damp firewood that never burned right. I dropped my keys on the counter and found myself standing at the window above the sink, peeking through the warped glass at the tree line that circled the back of the cabin like a fence I hadn't asked for. Between two trunks about 30 yards out, the underbrush looked darker than it should. I blinked, leaned closer, and it was just pines again. Just trees. I left the kitchen light on when I finally crashed on the couch. Sleep came in fits, short, sharp jolts of half-dreams where I stood in that old station clearing, the gap between the trees pulsing like a wound I couldn't stitch closed. Sometimes I'd feel a branch snap behind me, hear that wet whisper threading my name through the pine needles. At 2:12 a.m., I woke with my radio buzzing from where I'd left it on the coffee table. The voice on the other end was low, broken by static so thick I couldn't pin down who it was. Just 3 words slipped through before it cut out. "Don't look back." I sat there, breathing through the staleness of the cabin, the taste of cold coffee and pine pitch slicking the back of my throat. I didn't check the window again. I didn't want to see if the space between those trunks had widened while I slept. When the sun finally dragged its way over the ridge, I packed my duffel. Socks, uniform, spare thermos. I left the radio on the counter, humming its useless static to an empty room. The last thing I did was pin the station's list of rules to my front door, the paper soft from years of fingerprints and sweaty palms. Rule number 7 stared back at me in faded pencil. Never look between the trees. My breath fogged the cold glass of the door as I pulled it shut behind me. I told myself I wouldn't look back. I told myself I'd just keep walking, the same way Dan said he did. But halfway down the trail that cuts behind the maintenance shed, I felt it again. That itch between my shoulder blades, that pull like a hook under my ribs. I stopped. I turned. And between the trees, it was waiting. I should have run. Should have slammed my boots into the mud, broken branches under my soles, until the tree line spat me out on the old service road, where the pines thin enough to see daylight. But my feet stuck to the wet ground like the earth didn't want to give me up. Between those trunks, the dark pulsed slow, in and out, like the forest itself was breathing for the thing waiting inside. I raised my flashlight. The beam trembled across bark slick with dew. The gap swallowed the light like a mouth that never closes. For a second, I thought I saw something move deeper in. Not forward, not back, but sideways, shifting through a space that bent too tight to fit through. A glimpse of something pale, jointed wrong, arms longer than they should be, folding back like a coat slipping off shoulders that never learned how to stand up straight. A wind kicked through the needles overhead, cold enough to sting my eyes. It carried a smell I'd only caught once before, back when a hunter shot a deer too close to the river bend. The carcass lay half in the water for days before we found it. That same sour, sweet rot drifted down the trail now, thicker the closer I leaned toward the trunks. My radio buzzed on my belt, a single burst of static that popped in my ear like a knuckle cracking under skin. I pressed the call button out of habit, mouth dry, tongue sticking to the roof like I'd swallowed a handful of pine needles. No voice answered, just the hush of dead air. Then a whisper that slid through the static, dry and thin as wind through deadfall. Nate. It said my name like it owned it, like I'd left it out here for the forest to chew on. I took a step back. My heels sank in wet moss, but I didn't fall. The gap between the trees flexed wider, bark bending at the edges where no bark should bend. Inside, the dark rippled, not black but slick, like oil on a puddle, colors blooming and dying too quick for my eyes to hold. I swear I saw something reach out, a finger, a branch, a thread of shadow curling toward my boot. I turned and ran. This time my legs listened. Needles snapped underfoot, branches lashed my arms and face until I couldn't feel the sting anymore. I didn't look back, but the hush of the forest followed me, a breath at my neck, the whisper growing roots in my chest where no voice should live. By the time I stumbled out onto the old fire road, dawn was bleeding through the pines like watered-down paint. My lungs burned with cold that tasted like rust. I doubled over by the mile marker. 19, same as always, hands on my knees, boots slick with mud and pine pitch. I told myself I'd quit. Call the main office, toss my badge on the desk, pack what little I owned, and drift south until the pines gave way to wide roads and city lights. But as I caught my breath, I felt it behind my ribs. That tug, soft and patient, like the forest wasn't done with me yet. Far down the road, back where the trees swallowed the path in shade, I swear I saw that gap again, thin, waiting. And inside it, the whisper curled around my name like a promise. I spent the next 2 days holed up at the Ranger substation near Hollow Creek, the one with the peeling green paint and the coffee that tastes like burnt pine needles. I didn't check the trails. I didn't answer calls on the radio. I just sat at the window with the blinds half cracked, watching the tree line that presses so close it rattles the back door in the wind. The other rangers passed through in shifts, nodding, saying nothing. They knew better than to ask why my boots were still caked in black mud, or why my uniform smelled like the wet belly of the forest. Everyone in this job learns quick when to shut up and let the pines keep their secrets. I tried to sleep the second night, sprawled on the lumpy cot in the back room. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back at that gap, that slick darkness folding in on itself like a throat swallowing. The whisper curled under my ribs, warm and damp, spelling my name inside my head in a voice that felt too much like my own. At 3:07 a.m., the motion sensor outside the back door clicked on. I heard the crunch of gravel, slow, deliberate. I didn't look at first. I held my breath and stared at the cracked ceiling, counting the drips from the leaky faucet by the sink. But the porch light stayed on, and the sensor didn't click off, and the footsteps kept circling, soft enough I could almost pretend they were wind, except the wind doesn't leave footprints on dry gravel. When the footsteps stopped, I cracked the blind with 2 fingers. At first, all I saw was the yard, overgrown grass, an old picnic table half rotted through. But past the picnic bench, the tree line pressed closer than before. Pines that should have stood 50 yards back now leaned just beyond the patch of clearing the floodlight could reach. Between 2 trunks, massive, gnarled, their bark slick with moonlight, I saw it. A gap that didn't belong. A slice of dark that bent at the edges like the world couldn't hold it right. For a heartbeat, I swear I saw a shape inside it. Tall, bent, something that shivered like a flag in still air. The whisper bloomed inside my ears before I could slam the blind shut. Closer. It didn't say anything else. Just that one word, wet and warm behind my teeth. I stepped back from the window, boots squeaking on the linoleum. I grabbed the old service revolver from the locker by the door, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The porch light flicked off. The sensor died. The whisper didn't. I stood there in the dark, finger tapping the cold steel of the revolver's barrel, the radio at my belt hissing a soft static that didn't sound like static at all, more like breath. Slow and even, waiting for me to listen. When dawn broke, I found myself standing at the edge of the clearing, boots half sunk in wet grass that clung to my ankles like cold fingers. I don't remember walking there, don't remember unlocking the back door or stepping off the porch. But the dew on my sleeves told me I'd been outside longer than I could explain. The tree line in front of me looked normal in the new light, pines swaying just enough to whisper against each other. No gaps, no shadows bent wrong. But when I closed my eyes, I felt it, the shape pressed behind my eyelids, pulsing in time with my heartbeat, like it was stitched there. I drove out to the main ranger station by noon, punched in my clearance code at the side gate like nothing was wrong. The other guys nodded, tipped their mugs, asked if I'd slept. I lied. We all do. Nobody wants the truth out here. Not really. I sat down at my desk in the far corner, next to the dusty map pinned to the wall, where red pushpins mark all the places the forest swallowed folks whole. My fingers traced the edge of trail marker 19, the ink faded under my thumb. I could almost feel the gap breathing through the paper. Soft, patient, like it knew I'd be back. A stack of old incident reports waited in the bin by my boot. I flipped through them without reading. Names I recognized, dates that lined up too clean with the stories no one talks about. Dan's name came up 3 times. Once back in '83, once in '91, then again just 2 months before he quit. Each file had the same half-erased note at the bottom. Rule number 7. I looked up from the papers and caught my reflection in the window. For a second, I thought I saw something over my shoulder, a strip of dark that bent the daylight around it, wide enough to hide a man, thin enough to slip between trees without leaving a mark. I turned too quick, the chair legs scraping the linoleum loud enough to make the rookie across the room flinch. He shot me a look but didn't ask. Smart kid. I told myself I'd file a formal report, maybe push it up the chain. But I knew how it'd go, the same way it always does. Lost hiker, bad weather, maybe a bear, maybe the wind. The forest keeps its secrets because we help it keep them, or maybe because it keeps us. I clocked out before dusk, told the guys I'd do another sweep by the old fire road just to clear my head. They didn't question it. They never do. As I walked past the supply shed, I felt it again, that tug low in my gut, the whisper threading through my ribs like fishing line, pulling me back where I swore I'd never stand again. Between the trees at the lot's edge, the shadows folded together like wet cloth. And for a heartbeat, I swear I saw the gap grin. By the time I hit the old fire road, the sun was low enough to bleed the sky raw behind the pines. My boots kicked up dust that smelled like cold ash and old bark. Every step felt like it echoed too loud, bounced between the trees until the forest swallowed it whole and gave nothing back. I reached marker 19 just as the last bit of daylight dripped off the ridge. The trail looked narrower than I remembered, roots twisting across the path like veins under thin skin. Somewhere up ahead, a branch snapped. Not a deer, not wind, something heavier, dragging breath through the needles. I told myself I'd walk to the washout, snap a few photos for the file, then get the hell back before full dark pressed the air flat. But my feet didn't listen. They carried me deeper, crunching last fall's leaves under a layer of damp that stuck to my soles. I could smell the river bend down the slope. Mud and rot and the sharp metallic bite that never fades this deep in Pine Hollow. I knew where I was going before I saw it, that old clearing where the ranger station rotted out decades ago. The roof long gone, walls sunken into themselves like a rib cage picked clean. And past it, the trees, two massive trunks leaning together just enough to hold that gap wide open. The dark between them shimmered like oil. No stars, no wind, just that slow ripple like something breathing for the woods. I felt my pulse catch in my throat, beat twice, then settle into the hush under the pines. My radio crackled on my belt, then cut out with a pop that sounded too much like a bone snapping. I should have turned around. I should have backed down the slope, boots slipping through wet needles until the fire road opened under my heels again. Instead, I stepped closer, close enough that the dirt under my boots softened, black mud oozing through the laces, like the forest was trying to pull me into the roots. I swear I heard my name drift out of the dark. Not a whisper this time, a voice clear as mine, calling from inside the gap like it had been waiting all these years to say it out loud. Nate, I opened my mouth to answer. I don't know why. Maybe just to hear my voice drown it out, but no sound came. The gap bent, edges folding in like a smile I couldn't see but felt deep in my chest. Something moved behind the trunks. Pale, long, a shape that flickered between the bark like water sliding uphill. The forest leaned closer, branches sighing, needles brushing my shoulders as if the trees themselves wanted to hush my breath. And behind that thin slice of dark, something stepped forward. I don't remember drawing my flashlight, but its cold beam flickered weak against the gap. The light barely touched whatever pressed through that darkness. Just a slick outline of limbs too thin, elbows bent backward like a broken deer pulling itself upright for the first time. Its head tilted where no neck should bend, slow and deliberate, until it seemed to listen for my heartbeat. I wanted to run, I wanted my boots to slide back over the slick mud and carry me past Marker 19, past the washout, back to my truck and the rangers who'd pretend none of this existed if I asked them to. But the gap pulsed once, twice, like it was breathing for both of us, and my feet stayed sunk in the wet earth. It stepped closer. The trunks didn't shift to make room. The shape folded through them, skin slick with shadow that sucked in my flashlight's glow until the battery whined in my grip. I swear I heard it hum, not in my ears, but deep in my chest, under my ribs where that whisper first found a place to root. It stopped a few feet from the edge of the trees. I could see it clearer now, pale skin puckered in places like old paper left in rain, joints swelling and shrinking as if they hadn't decided what shape to hold. Its arms ended in long fingers that dragged through the mud, stirring the black water that welled around my boots. It raised one hand. The fingers curled around something small, something that swung when it shifted weight from one side to the other. The beam of my flashlight caught a flicker of silver. My badge, the same one I'd left on the cabin desk, the same one that should have been locked inside my truck, miles from here. The shape lifted my badge to where its face should have been, but there was nothing there, just a hollow smear of darkness that drank the last of my light until the bulb popped with a soft hiss. In that second of silence, I heard the forest breathe again. Needles brushing needles, branches groaning under weight I couldn't see. A voice slid out of the space where its mouth wasn't. A perfect echo of my own words the day I first swore the oath that kept me tied to this park. We watch what others won't. I felt it repeat inside my skull, pressing against bone, bending my knees until I nearly dropped to the mud. The gap behind the thing folded wider, trees bending without cracking, bark stretching as if it were skin. I knew if I stepped forward, if I leaned just enough to slip between those trunks, the forest would swallow me whole. Badge and boots and name stitched into the hush forever. I felt the thing press my badge against my chest, cold metal sinking through my uniform like water through leaves. Its hand lingered there, fingers brushing my collar, tracing my name as if to be sure it had it right. When the wind sighed through the clearing, the voice rose one last time. Mine and not mine. A promise stitched into the hush between the pines. Never look between the trees. I blinked. The gap was empty, but I know I didn't come back alone.